Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a topic that's incredibly important and honestly a bit daunting. The global market for acute lymphoblastic leukemia, or AL. We've got this market report that goes all the way out to 2033, and, well, let's just say it's pretty eye-opening stuff.
Yeah, the future of AL treatment is, well, it's complex, to say the least. And for anyone listening who might not be super familiar, AL is a type of cancer that starts in the bone marrow. Basically, it messes with your blood. Your body starts producing way too many of these immature white blood cells. And this report, it dives into the whole economic side of things, the costs and trends in diagnosing and treating this condition. It's a surprisingly big global market, actually.
Yeah, it really is. So in this deep dive, we're going to try to break down the major takeaways, like what's fueling the growth of this market, what kinds of treatments are becoming more common, and where in the world is all this happening. Just to give you a sense of the scale, the global LL market is predicted to hit 720 million US dollars by 2025. Then, by 2033, less than a decade later, it's projected to jump to 6,585.32 million US dollars. That's a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate of 7.40%.
Yeah, that 7.4% annual growth, that's not something to just brush over. So as we go through all this, we'll be highlighting the treatments and the regions that are really driving this expansion, and more importantly, why this is all happening.
Okay, so big picture first. We've got that global market for AL treatment estimated at about 300 and 720 million in 2025. And then fast forward, by 2033, it's expected to climb to 600 and 585.32 million, with that steady growth rate of 7.40% per year.
Right. And just so everyone knows, the report's baseline data is from 2024. They looked at data from 2021 and 2024 to see the trends over time, estimated the 2025 figures, and then forecasted all the way out to 2033. Pretty comprehensive, really.
Now, let's break it down by region, because things are definitely not the same everywhere. North America's got the biggest chunk of the market right now.
They do. It seems North America makes up more than 40% of the global market revenue in 2025. So that's about 376.40 million US dollars. Interestingly, while it's still growing, their projected CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is a little less than the global average at 5.9%.
So leading now, but maybe not growing as fast. The report gives some reasons for this. A rising number of ALL cases, obviously, but also the advancements in those targeted therapies and a whole lot of investment in research.
Yeah, definitely. North America's got a really strong healthcare system, and the adoption rate for those advanced treatments, especially in immunotherapy like CAR T cell therapy, is pretty high. Think of CAR T as a way to kind of train a patient's own immune cells to recognize and attack the leukemia directly. Also, their regulations are pretty favorable towards these newer therapies. Plus, there's growing awareness about ABL, better ways to diagnose it, and more people with insurance coverage. All of that contributes, plus an aging population and that focus on treating childhood leukemia.
If we zoom in on specific countries, the United States makes up most of that, with a projected market of 185.98 million US dollars in 2025 and a CAGR of 5.7%. Canada's at 165.17%, with a slightly higher growth rate of 6.7%. And Mexico's looking at 125.25 million with a 6.4% CAGR.
Right. And those differences in growth rates, they probably reflect the differences in their healthcare systems where they're focusing their research and the demographics of each country.
Makes sense. Okay, heading over to Europe, they're the second largest market for ALL treatment.
That's right. Europe makes up over 30% of the global revenue, with a projected market size of 178.80 million US dollars in 2025. And they're expecting a CAGR of 6.4% from 2025 to 2033. Solid growth.
Like North America, it seems the growth in Europe is being fueled by a rising number of all-RL cases and the adoption of those more precise targeted therapies. The report also mentions a rise in immunotherapies, including CAR T.
Right, and what's interesting about Europe is the role of government support. They've got these favorable reimbursement policies in many countries, which really helps people access these advanced treatments. They also have a pretty strong healthcare infrastructure, significant R&D investment, and like North America, an aging population. The report also mentions rising awareness about early diagnosis, lots of collaboration happening in the biotech sector, a real push toward personalized medicine, and some pretty impressive advancements in detecting minimal residual disease, or MRD. That's basically the tiny amount of disease that can remain after treatment. Detecting it better can really guide treatment decisions and ultimately impacts the market.
It seems the United Kingdom is doing pretty well in Europe, with a projected market size of 181.24 million in 2025 and a CAGR of 7.2%.
Right.
The report specifically mentions their increased use of advanced immunotherapies and targeted treatments.
Yeah. And looking at other countries, Germany is projected to have a market of 213.60 million with a 6.6% CAGR, France at 99.25 million with 5.6%, Italy at 92.78 million with 5.8%, and Russia at 167.21 million with a 5.4 project CAGR. The report also gives figures for Spain, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, even smaller markets like Luxembourg, each with their own growth projections.
Now, on to a region that's predicted to see some huge growth, Asia-Pacific, or APAC.
APAC currently makes up about 23% of the global market, with a market size estimated at 892.80 million US dollars in 2025. But here's the thing. Their projected CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is the highest of all the regions, a whopping
A
10.1%.
10.1% growth rate, wow. What's behind this rapid expansion in APAC?
A few things. First, a general increase in cancer cases in the region. Second, and this is huge, there's been an increase in healthcare spending, so people have better access to those advanced treatments. There's also growing awareness about ALL, meaning earlier diagnoses. Governments are putting initiatives in place to tackle cancer. We're seeing more pharma R&D in the region, more clinical trials, and new therapies like CAR-E are getting approved. And of course, an aging population and lifestyle changes contribute to the rise in ALL cases.
India specifically stands out with the highest projected CAGR at 12%, with a market size of 89.28 million US dollars in 2025. That's really something.
It is, and the other major players in APAC are also showing strong growth. China's at 374.98 million with a 9.6% CAGR, Japan at 123.21 million with 8.6%, and South Korea at 107.14 million with a 9.2% CAGR. Even Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia are showing robust growth in this area.
Moving on to South America, what's the situation there?
Right now, South America holds a bit over 5% of the market with a size of 141.36 million US dollars in 2025. The CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is projected at a healthy 8.1%.
What's driving this growth in South America?
Like other regions, there's a rising number of ALL cases and healthcare spending is going up. But the report also points out that access to treatment has been improving. There are initiatives from both governments and nonprofits, and more clinical research is happening in the region. The approval of new immunotherapies, like CAGR, is also playing a role, alongside increased public awareness, better healthcare infrastructure, and even international investments. More insurance coverage and patient assistance programs are also making treatment more accessible.
It seems Brazil is a pretty significant market in South America.
Yeah, Brazil's projected at 60.50 million in 2025 with an 8.7% CAGR. The report attributes this to their investment in pharma research and the clinical trials they're conducting. Other key markets in the region are Argentina, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, each with their own projected growth rates.
What about the Middle East?
Currently, the Middle East makes up about 2% of the global market, with a size of 148.880 million US dollars in 2025. Their projected CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is a solid 8.7%.
What's fueling this growth in the Middle East?
Well, the report says there's a rising incidence of ALL, and like in other regions, their healthcare infrastructure has been improving, and there's growing awareness about early diagnosis. The governments are investing more in cancer care, people have better access to those advanced treatments, and there are more partnerships with international pharma companies. We're also seeing a rise in targeted therapies, immunotherapies, and even stem cell transplants. Plus, reimbursement policies are getting better, and overall healthcare spending is increasing.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE seem to be the main players there.
They are. Saudi Arabia is projected at 52.38 million in 2025 with a 9% CAGR, mostly because they're investing more in oncology care. The UAE is also significant at 30.65 million with a 9.2% CAGR. Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt also contribute to the region's market size and growth.
Last but not least, let's look at Africa.
Okay, so Africa currently holds around 1% of the global market, with a size of 81.84 million in 2025. The projected CAGR from 2025 to 2033 is 7.7%.
What's the situation in Africa?
There's definitely a rising number of ALL cases, but also increasing public awareness about the disease, and diagnoses are getting better. The healthcare infrastructure is expanding, people are getting more access to chemotherapy, and governments and international organizations are working to improve treatment availability. Those advancements in targeted therapies and immunotherapies are starting to make a difference, but the report does point out some serious challenges. The high cost of treatment, not enough specialized healthcare facilities, and the fact that many cases aren't diagnosed until later stages.
The report mentions South Africa and Nigeria specifically.
Yep, South Africa is projected at 28.81 million in 2025, with an 8.6% CAGR, thanks to their growing healthcare infrastructure.
Mm.
Nigeria is a smaller market right now, but still expected to grow.
So we've covered the geographical breakdown. Now let's talk about the different types of treatment, the actual therapies being used.
Right. So the report says that good old chemotherapy is expected to remain the dominant treatment for all for the foreseeable future. It's widely available, it's usually the first line of defense, and it's effective at attacking leukemia cells. Even with all the advancements in other areas, chemo is still a cornerstone of all treatment for both kids and adults in achieving remission. That is, when the cancer goes away or the signs and symptoms decrease.
But the report also points to another treatment area that's seeing really rapid growth.
Yeah, immunotherapy is identified as the fastest growing segment within the all market. It's because of its ability to target and destroy those leukemia cells without causing as much damage to healthy tissues as chemo. Specifically, the report highlights CAR T cell therapy and monoclonal antibodies. Monoclonal antibodies are basically lab-made proteins designed to attach to specific targets on cancer cells. We talked about CAR T earlier, where a patient's own T cells, a type of immune cell, are modified to recognize and fight the cancer cells. These immunotherapies are seeing amazing success, especially in patients who have relapsed or haven't responded well to initial treatments. They're leading to higher survival rates and often have fewer of those harsh side effects from chemo, which is making them more and more important and driving the growth of that market segment.
Right. Targeted therapies are mentioned too as a key driver of the market. How do they fit into all of this?
Yeah, targeted therapies, while not the single fastest growing segment like immunotherapy, are a crucial and growing part of all treatment. They zero in on specific molecules or pathways that are essential for the cancer cells to grow and survive. The report emphasizes these advancements in targeted therapies as a big reason the entire all market is expanding. And they often work alongside chemo and increasingly with immunotherapies to get better results for patients.
Now, the report also looks at the end users of these treatments. Where are these therapies actually being administered? What does that tell us?
Currently, hospitals have the biggest market share because they're the main places where all is diagnosed and treated. It makes sense. Hospitals are equipped to offer the full range of therapies, chemotherapy, stem cell transplants, and those CAR T cell therapies we've been talking about. They've got specialized oncology departments, provide comprehensive care, and are usually the main sites for clinical trials.
But it seems like clinics are becoming more important too.
They are. The report says the clinic segment is growing fast. This is because advanced therapies like CAR T and monoclonal antibodies are being used more and more in those specialized settings. Clinics can sometimes offer more focused and personalized care. They can provide access to those newer treatments, and they can also take part in clinical trials, which could mean better outcomes for patients. So yeah, the demand for those more targeted therapies is definitely driving the growth of clinics in this area.
All right, so what are the main forces driving this whole market forward? The report mentions a few key factors.
Yeah, we've touched on a few, but basically, the progress we're seeing in targeted therapies and immunotherapies is a huge factor. They're making all treatment more effective, and that's driving market growth. Then there's the increase in global healthcare spending, along with government initiatives. That's also a big boost. And of course, as awareness of all grows and we get better at early diagnosis, more people are seeking and receiving treatment, which impacts the market size.
But of course, not everything is rosy. What about the things that could potentially slow down the growth of this market?
Well, the report mentions the high cost of treatment. Access to some of these advanced therapies is still limited. Not everyone, not every healthcare system, can easily afford or provide the latest innovations. Plus, those potential side effects and complications from chemotherapy and some targeted therapies, those can also impact how they're used and managed.
Looking ahead, what are some of the key trends the report highlights?
The increasing use of targeted therapies and immunotherapies, like CAR T, is definitely a big one, as we've discussed. Another really important trend is the rise of precision medicine and biomarker-driven treatments. Basically, that means tailoring the treatment to each patient's specific leukemia based on their genetic and molecular profile. We're getting better and better at that.
Finally, the report gives a glimpse into the competitive landscape. Seems like a pretty dynamic area.
It is. The owl market is super competitive, with those big pharma companies pouring resources into developing and bringing those advanced therapies to market. CAR T, monoclonal antibodies, and other targeted drugs are the main areas where companies are competing. They're investing in R&D, running clinical trials, and navigating all those regulatory hurdles to introduce new and better treatments. And there's a lot of strategic partnerships happening, acquisitions of smaller companies, and expansions of drug pipelines. It's a very active field.
The report even gives some examples of that.
It does. It mentions Shorla Oncology and Eversana launching Nelarabine injection in May 2023. This drug's for certain types of relapsed or refractory ALL and lymphoblastic lymphoma for both kids and adults. It also mentions Coeptis Therapeutics and Bullhorn Holdings Corp., merging back in April 2023. Another example of those strategic moves and consolidations in the pharma world related to cancer treatment.
So we've covered a lot. We've seen that the global market for all teletreatment is projected to grow significantly over the next decade. And those regional differences are really interesting, especially how fast Asia-Pacific is expected to grow, thanks to increased healthcare access and a lot of investment in research. We're also seeing a shift toward those innovative immunotherapies, even as chemo remains important. And while hospitals are still central, specialized clinics are becoming more and more important in providing these advanced therapies.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but what I find really thought-provoking is this. As these cutting-edge treatments become more common, and they're often super expensive, how do we make sure everyone who needs them can get them? How do we bridge that gap so these incredible advancements actually benefit all patients globally, no matter where they live or their financial situation? That's something we really need to consider as this field keeps evolving.
Absolutely. Food for thought, for sure. Well, it seems like you now have a much better grasp of this complex landscape, all the different factors shaping the future of the AOL treatment market. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.